The cold winds of the Riverlands swept through the encampments near Riverrun, where Stark bannermen had established a strategic outpost to hold the line against any incursion from the west. The banners of House Stark and House Tully fluttered in the breeze, signaling a united front. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, tensions simmered as scouts reported strange movements in the distance. Unbeknownst to the defenders, Tywin Lannister had sent his most brutal enforcer, Ser Gregor Clegane, the mountain that rides, with a force of 2,000 men to test the Stark and Tully defenses. Tywin's orders were clear. Strike hard and fast at this outpost, disrupt their supply lines, and remind Robert Baratheon and his allies that crossing into Lannister territory would come at a heavy cost. The attack came at dawn. Ser Gregor's forces descended on the outpost with ruthless efficiency, their crimson banners cutting through the early morning mist. The mountain led the charge atop his massive warhorse, his sword a terrifying blur as he carved through the Stark sentries with brutal ease. The defenders scrambled to rally, their cries of alarm echoing through the valley as they fought to hold their ground. Inside the outpost, Lord Umber, one of the Stark bannermen commanding the defense, shouted orders to his men. "Hold the line. Send riders to Riverrun for reinforcements. We'll not let these lions take our ground without a fight." The Stark forces rallied quickly, forming shield walls and preparing for the onslaught. Archers loosed volleys of arrows, their shafts darkening the sky as they aimed for the advancing Lannister soldiers. The Riverlands terrain, filled with shallow rivers and dense woods, provided some advantage to the defenders, slowing the Lannister cavalry's approach. Despite the fierce resistance, the mountain proved an unstoppable force. His massive blade cut down men with every swing, and his mere presence seemed to instill fear in the Stark forces. The Lannister soldiers, emboldened by their commander's savagery, pressed forward, breaching the outer defenses of the outpost. The fighting was brutal and chaotic, with both sides sustaining heavy losses. Stark bannermen, clad in their gray cloaks, fought valiantly to protect their position, but the sheer ferocity of Ser Gregor's assault began to wear them down. Fires erupted within the camp as the Lannisters set tents and supply wagons ablaze, further demoralizing the defenders. Just as it seemed the outpost would fall, the sound of distant horns echoed across the battlefield. Reinforcements from Riverrun had arrived, led by Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. His forces charged into the fray, catching the Lannister troops off guard and forcing them to regroup. The sudden arrival of fresh troops bolstered the Stark defenders, giving them a renewed sense of hope. Ser Brynden himself engaged Ser Gregor in a brief but fierce clash. The mountain's overwhelming strength met the Blackfish's skill and agility, though neither man could gain the upper hand. Eventually, the Lannisters began to withdraw, their mission to test the outpost's strength complete. As the dust settled, the outpost remained in Stark hands, though at a heavy cost. Dozens of men lay dead or wounded, and the camp was in ruins. Lord Umber approached Ser Brynden, his face grim but determined. "You came just in time, Blackfish," Umber said, "but the lions won't stop with this. Tywin's testing our defenses, seeing where we're weakest." Ser Brynden nodded, wiping the blood from his blade. "And we've shown him we're not easily broken. But you're right, this was just the beginning. We must be ready for what comes next." Word of the skirmish quickly reached Riverrun and Robert's main camp. The attack served as a stark reminder of Tywin Lannister's cunning and ruthlessness. While the Lannisters had failed to take the outpost, they had succeeded in delivering a clear message. The West would not fall without a fight. Robert, Ned, and their allies now faced a critical decision: whether to press forward into Lannister territory or shore up their defenses against what would undoubtedly be a brutal and protracted war. Robb Stark rode at the head of his column, flanked by his captains and bannermen, the banners of House Stark fluttering in the brisk Riverlands wind. The urgency of their mission weighed heavily on his mind. 10,000 men were under his command, tasked with securing the region and preparing for Tywin Lannister's next move. The young wolf, as his men called him, was resolute, yet the strain of command had already begun to harden him. As they rode, Robb turned to his captains, discussing strategies and supply lines. "We'll need to secure the crossings near the Red Fork," he said, his tone measured but firm. "If the Lannisters try to break through again, that's where they'll strike. Keep the Outriders scouting ahead. We can't afford another ambush." Suddenly, a thunderous roar tore through the sky, loud enough to halt the entire column. The men's chatter ceased, replaced by the nervous whinnies of horses and the clinking of armor as soldiers reached for their weapons. Robb instinctively gripped the reins of his horse tighter, his head snapping upward to search the heavens. "Dragon!" came the cry from a scout galloping toward them, his voice filled with panic. "Dragons in the sky!" Robb turned in his saddle, his sharp blue eyes scanning the horizon. At first, he saw nothing but clouds and the distant expanse of the Riverlands. Then, from the west, he saw them. 2 colossal dragons, their wings blotting out the sun as they roared through the skies with an intensity that seemed to shake the earth itself. Their scales gleamed like molten metal, one a deep crimson with veins of gold, the other as black as coal, streaked with fiery orange. The sheer size of them was unimaginable, dwarfing any dragon of legend Robb had heard of, even the infamous Balerion the Black Dread. The 2 dragons flew with terrifying speed, their roars echoing like thunder as they headed northward, toward the lands of winter. The men in the column froze, some muttering prayers, others gripping their swords as though they could fight what they could barely comprehend. Robb's horse reared slightly, spooked by the dragon's cries, but he held it firm, his mind racing. "Send word to Winterfell immediately," Robb shouted, his voice cutting through the growing panic. "And to the Night's Watch, they must know what's coming." One of his captains, Lord Karstark, turned to him, his face pale. "The Night's Watch? Do you think they'll head beyond the wall?" Robb's expression was grim as he watched the dragons vanish into the northern horizon. "I don't know, but we can't take chances. If dragons of that size are flying to the north, it's not by accident. Something is happening, something we don't understand yet." Another roar echoed in the distance, fainter now but still enough to send a chill through the ranks. The column stirred uneasily, men muttering among themselves about the ancient stories of dragons and fire. Robb raised a hand to silence them, his voice steady and commanding. "Hold your ground," he called out. "We are Starks, and we do not cower before legends. Whatever this means, we will face it as we always have, with honor and courage." The men quieted, though the unease lingered. Robb turned back to his captains. "Increase the pace. We need to secure the region and send our reports quickly. The north and the wall must be warned." As the column began to move again, Robb glanced once more toward the horizon where the dragons had disappeared. His thoughts turned to his family, to Winterfell, and to the ancient words of his house. Winter is coming. Now, it seemed, something far greater than winter was stirring, and the young wolf could not shake the feeling that the fate of his family, and the realm, was about to change forever. At Castle Black, Lord Commander Jeor Mormont paced along the icy battlements, his sharp eyes fixed on the vast, frozen expanse beyond the wall. Reports from his rangers had grown increasingly dire. Wildlings were fleeing north in unprecedented numbers, abandoning their villages and camps, driven by some unknown and terrifying force. The cold wind howled around him, carrying with it the faint echoes of a world in turmoil. Mormont paused near the edge of the battlements, gripping the stone as he scanned the horizon. A few senior brothers of the Night's Watch stood nearby, their faces marked with unease. They had heard the rumors, whispers among the men about shadows moving in the far north, but none could confirm the truth. "Thousands fleeing north," Mormont muttered to himself, his grizzled features set in a grim frown. "What in the name of the gods would drive them to colder hells?" One of the brothers ventured to speak, his voice trembling slightly. "Whatever it is, Lord Commander, it must be worse than what's behind them." Before Mormont could respond, the cold air was shattered by a deafening roar, low and guttural, reverberating through the icy landscape. The sound seemed to come from beyond the wall, carrying a primal force that silenced the murmurs of the men. Every brother on the battlements froze, their eyes wide as they strained to locate the source of the terrifying noise. "That's no mammoth," one of the men whispered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. Mormont's hand tightened on the hilt of his sword as his gaze swept the horizon. The roar came again, louder this time, shaking the very stones of the wall. The men gripped their weapons, fear etched across their faces. Suddenly, the air seemed to shift, growing heavier. The faint sound of something vast moving through the sky reached them, a steady rhythm like drums pounding in the distance. One of the men pointed upward, his voice cracking as he yelled, "There! Look!" Mormont's eyes followed the man's trembling finger, and his breath caught. Two immense shapes emerged from the misty horizon, their wings beating with an intensity that sent waves of turbulence across the wall. As they drew closer, the details became horrifyingly clear. Dragons, larger than anything the Lord Commander had ever imagined, their wings spanning the sky like storm clouds. The first dragon was a deep crimson, its scales shimmering with fiery gold undertones that caught the pale sunlight. The second was as black as night, streaked with glowing veins of molten orange, its body exuding an aura of unrelenting power. Both dragons were larger than any beast in legend, their size dwarfing even the mightiest castles of the realm. Their roars filled the air, shaking the icy stones beneath Mormont's feet. The brothers of the Night's Watch stood in stunned silence, some clutching their weapons, others dropping them entirely. These were not the creatures of children's tales. These were gods of fire and fury made flesh. Mormont's voice, though strained, broke through the stunned silence. "Hold your ground," he bellowed. "They're not here for us." Indeed, the dragons showed no interest in Castle Black or the men upon the wall. With terrifying speed, they flew overhead, their massive forms casting shadows across the snow-covered battlements. The wind from their wings sent a biting chill through the men, and Mormont's cape billowed violently as he watched the creatures soar toward the north, disappearing into the icy horizon. One of the brothers finally found his voice, trembling with disbelief. "Dragons, Lord Commander. Real dragons. Bigger than any in the stories." Mormont nodded slowly, his weathered face pale but composed. "Bigger than Balerion," he muttered. "And heading north. Why?" Another brother, his voice shaking, asked, "What should we do, Lord Commander?" Mormont turned sharply, his tone commanding. "Send ravens. To Winterfell, to the lords of the north, to anyone who will listen. Let them know what we've seen." The men scrambled to obey, their fear tempered by the weight of Mormont's authority. The Lord Commander turned back to the horizon, his expression grim as he gripped the icy stone. "Whatever is stirring in the north," he said quietly, "it's something beyond all of us. Winter is coming, and now fire comes with it." He stood there long after the dragons disappeared, the cold wind whipping around him as the weight of what he had witnessed settled in his bones. Beyond the wall, the frozen wilderness lay silent once more, but Mormont knew that silence was only the prelude to the storm.